So we have Brian Hughes, is going to give us a Rock of the Month for a very brief session before our invited speaker, Paul Wright, takes the stage. So I will hand you over to Brian with no more introduction.
Evening all, I'm Brian Hughes, I'm a mathematician, I'm not a geologist. This arises from a 2-week holiday in Shetland with an old university friend of Kate's and her partner, and we spent 2 weeks looking at rocks and our other interests, which are archaeology, birds of course, if anyone knows me, and wildflowers. And the reason that I picked these rocks, you're going to get two for the price of one, is that it rather nicely, I think.
I forgot to give you the microphone. Sorry about this. You've got a bunch of amateurs here. Don't even know how to operate one of these things. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, this is for the recording.
Yeah, it rather nicely, these rocks combine two of my interests, which are geology and archaeology. On the first day, we went to the local museum in Lerwick, and we saw many examples of this rather fine rock, which I really loved. Bluish colour, very highly polished. And they're called Shetland knives, though it's almost certain that they weren't used for cutting, because the edges are very rounded. And it seems likely that they were used a bit like we use brooches, that the women wore them ornamentally, and they're found very regularly in Neolithic burial chambers, so perhaps they had some sort of ceremonial purpose. And this rock is a felsite riebeckite rich. Now, if you go onto the Malvern Hills, you come across names like diorite. Geologists like giving names to rocks. Now, diorite is very rigorously defined. It has to obey certain geochemical characteristics. It has to have a certain mineralogy. But the way I understand it is that a felsite is very much vaguer. It's a sort of general term that's used in the field. So I sort of imagine a field geologist going in and seeing this rock and thinking, well, that looks like a felsite, and calling it that before he goes back to his lab could be a bit more definite. Anyway, what is a felsite? It's a fine-grained volcanic igneous rock, maybe porphyritic, which means it's can have large crystals, and the major minerals are always quartz and feldspars. And perhaps because of those two minerals, it's generally of a light sort of greyish colour. This is an example here. And it's got two more interesting minerals found in this particular one. One is aegerin, which is sodium pyroxene, and the other is riebeckite. And here's riebeckite. So it's got an OH2, that's water, so it's a hydrated sodium iron silicate, and it's an amphibole. And what is significant about this amphibole is it's blue. And it's that gives these Shetland knives this rather lovely colour. So here is the archipelago of Shetland. This is what they call mainland. There's Lerwick there. And we were looking for this felsite, riebeckite rich felsite, up here in what is called North Row. And here's the geology map. This and this are the oldest rocks on Shetland, 2.7 to 2.8 billion years old. They're Archean gneisses. These are undeformed. Those are deformed. Now, the bit we're interested in is this pinker shape here. And this was an intrusion into the gneisses in the Silurian. And this is called the Ronus Hill granifier. Now, I think a granifier is basically a rock of granite composition, but it's different from a granite. So it tends to be, I think, finer grained, This has slightly different texture, particularly if you look at it under a microscope. But what we were after for these two rocks was this dike swarm, these yellow things, which are obviously later intrusions into the granophyre. And we actually parked the car somewhere over here and walked in effectively along the contact between the gneisses and the granophyre, looking, of course, for these things. And Alan had been there before, so he told us what to look for. And this is a rather magnificent example of a spherulite. These are the big spherical crystals of the riebeckite. And we found that on the track, but unfortunately it was rather too heavy to pull out the 2 miles. So I've got this rather poorer specimen here, but at least you can see the riebeckite quite clearly. So we walked along this track. Somewhere around here we found that block with the riebeckite crystals in. And if you look carefully here, you can see here pink. So that's the granophyre. Here, more pink, more granophyre. But what had attracted Alan's attention, and he pointed it out to us, was this scree run here of this much lighter grey colour. So we thought, yeah, this looks promising, perhaps that's the dike. And sure enough, it was. And I said there were 2 reasons why I chose these rocks. One was because it was geology and archaeology combined. And the second is because I'm a pretty awful field geologist. If anyone who's been with me in the field will know. But this was one of my minor triumphs, because Alan went off right and I went off left. And I just couldn't believe it when I found this. Granophyre, felsite, and this, of course, is a chilled margin. And this is where the second rock comes in, because there isn't any chert, there isn't any flint on Shetland. So what did they use for their axes, their cutting tools? Well, they used the chilled margin. So in other words, they got their brooches out of this, and they got their practical stuff out of that, the chilled margin. This is the scene in full. So there's the chilled margin, granophyre, felsite, and Alan found another rather poorer, if I may say so, example on the right there. And then we walked across the hillside, came to the next dike, and sure enough, the archaeologists had opened up this little cave, and you could go duck in there and see the chilled margin. And that's where they dug out their hand axes 5,500 years ago. And the hillside round here was absolutely littered with pieces that they discarded, presumably weren't good enough. And if you like to come out later, this bit we just picked up. I don't think it's been shaped by the Neolithic peoples, but that is pretty sharp, that edge. So there are more pictures of the felsite. This one you've seen before with the spherulites. This is another example. You can see the bluish colour here, showing it's riebeckite, but this has got some sort of fabric across there. That's a banded felsite. And if we look at a bit more detail at the chilled margin, you can see again a fabric down here parallel to the dike. So one sort of hypothesis is that was flow banding, perhaps, with pulses coming into the dike and it was expanding and coming in layers. I'm no geologist, who knows? And here we have a fairly remarkable picture, which was taken by Kay, I think. And this was taken using an ordinary mobile phone through a hand lens. And you can see 2 beautiful spherulites of riebeckite there. And we looked at some papers, and sure enough, you see something fairly similar to what we were picking up. And then we were really puzzled. We carried on to have a look at the Archaeonices across a moorland. We came across this thing, and we hadn't got a clue what this was. We had to consult some experts, and they thought that it was spherulitic felsite, again, that had been very heavily weathered and altered. So probably that's what it is. And that's it. If you'd like to come and see these specimens, please do.